A terrible fever had a hold of Caleb's heart, and deep inside its grip, he mumbled about the one woman who broke through his defenses. He told the ghost in his cabin, "Don't let her stay here. Love just ruins everything." On the other side of that door, Lydia Monroe heard him, and his fearful words broke her heart. She had traveled 1,000 miles from Boston to teach children, not to fight for a man's broken spirit. But here she was, risking it all for a man who saw love as a weakness. Can a heart that's been hurt that bad ever learn to trust again? Stay with me to find out. This story takes place in the Montana Territory, a beautiful and unforgiving land. It was the kind of place that taught you a hard lesson early. You either survive it or you don't. At 26 years old, Caleb Hart was a survivor. He built his life to be sturdy and alone, just like the cabin he put up 3 miles outside of Red Willow. Every morning started before the sun came up. He'd pull on his old clothes and step out into the cold air. He moved through his chores like clockwork, feeding the animals and splitting wood. He did it all to keep his mind quiet and his world under control. A neighbor once told him, "You ain't doing nothing out here but running from what scares you." Caleb made sure not to talk to that man for 3 months. By the time the sun was high, his shirt was soaked with sweat. He peeled it off, showing the scars that marked his skin. There was one from a bull's horn and another from a knife. But the deepest scars, the ones you could not see, were the ones that made all his choices for him. He was only 12 when his mother just packed a bag and left. She went back east to her family, who never wanted her to marry a dreamer. His father, Thomas Hart, had loved her with a fire that burned too bright. After she was gone, that fire went out. Thomas worked himself to the bone for 6 months, trying to forget. Then one morning, Caleb found him in the barn with a rope. He cut his father down and held him while the man cried like his soul had shattered. Thomas lived for 8 more years, but he was just a shadow. The man Caleb knew died the day his wife walked away. Right before the end, his father whispered to him, "Don't ever let somebody matter that much to you. It is safer to be alone, son." Caleb tried to forget that warning once. He started seeing a girl named Sarah Winters. For 3 months, he let himself imagine a different kind of life, one with a family and a shared home. Then a soldier named Marcus Thornton came back to town, all shiny medals and heroic stories. Sarah married him 6 weeks later and barely gave Caleb a second glance at the wedding. Standing in the back of that church, Caleb felt his father's words turn to ice in his gut. Safer alone. From that day on, he made sure of it. He kept his trips to Red Willow short and to the point. His life worked just fine that way. Days turned into weeks and seasons changed. He found a simple peace in being by himself. He told himself it was enough. The day he rode into Red Willow for winter supplies was supposed to be like any other. He tied his horse outside the general store and went inside. The place was busy with other folks stocking up for the cold months. He gave a short nod to the men he knew, but did not stop to chat. He handed his list to Old Man Winters, who ran the store. It was a simple list: flour, coffee, and ammunition. Mr. Winters looked it over and said, "This is not enough to get a man through the winter. Are you planning on starving?" Caleb just said, "I will manage." Mr. Winters shook his head. "Stubborn, just like your father." Caleb did not say a word back. He had money buried back at his cabin. But what good was it? Dreams of a bigger ranch or a family home required hope, and hope was a dangerous thing. "We have a new school teacher," Mr. Winters said, trying to make conversation. "Just arrived from Boston." Caleb was not interested in town gossip. His world was about hard work and survival, not books and fancy learning. Just then he heard a commotion outside. People were shouting and pointing down the street. Caleb looked out the window and saw it. The thunder of panicked hooves pulling a runaway wagon. Without a second thought, he was out the door. The wagon was coming down Main Street at full speed. A woman was pulling on the reins with all her might, but they were broken. She was terrified but determined. The wagon swerved wildly, tilting up on 2 wheels. Boxes and supplies went flying everywhere as people scrambled to get out of the way. Caleb saw exactly where the wagon was headed, right for a group of people standing in front of the hotel. He started running, his boots hitting the hard dirt. The horses were wild-eyed with fear, spooked by some bells on their harnesses. The woman driving was helpless. In a single motion, Caleb leaped and grabbed the lead horse's bridle. The force of it almost pulled him clean off his feet, and the impact sent him down to his knees. His shoulder screamed in protest, but he held on tight. "Whoa now," he yelled, his voice cutting through the noise. "Easy." The powerful horse fought against him, but Caleb dug his boots in and held fast. Slowly, the team began to slow down. The wagon slid to a stop just 20 feet from where a group of children had been playing. A sudden silence fell over the street. Caleb let go of the bridle and called out to the driver. "Are you all right?" Horse went wild again. They would be in a world of trouble. "I believe so." Her voice was a surprise, clear as a bell and steady, with a fine accent that belonged in a fancy parlor, not on a runaway wagon in Montana. "Thank you for your intervention." Intervention, not help, not rescue. Caleb finally looked at the woman. She sat straight as a pine tree, even after almost meeting her maker. She looked to be in her mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back, though the chaos had shaken a few strands loose. Her eyes were what got him, though. They were gray like a winter storm and held not one bit of fear. "Your hands are bleeding," she said. Caleb glanced down at the rope burns. "It is nothing. Still, I am grateful." She started to climb down and stumbled, and Caleb caught her. She was lighter than he figured. "I am Lydia Monroe. I teach at the school." This woman had a spine made of pure steel. You could see it in how she stood and looked him square in the eye. "What spooked them?" he asked. "Those?" She pointed to some bells on the harness. Someone thought they would be festive. The horses felt differently. A crowd started to gather. Ezra Webb, a man with a face like a road map, pushed through. "Miss Monroe, are you all right?" He looked at Caleb. "Saw what you did, Hart. That was brave. Foolish, but brave." "The harness needs fixing," Caleb said, waving off the compliment. "I will see to it," Ezra promised. "Miss Monroe, let me help with your things." "I can manage," Lydia said, "but I would appreciate help with the wagon." She started gathering boxes, moving with a purpose that defied the scare she just had. Caleb watched her sort through her supplies for the school. Books, a globe, and slates. "Do you always turn down help?" The words were out of his mouth before he could stop them. "Do you always assume a woman needs rescuing?" The folks nearby went quiet, smelling a fight. Caleb felt his neck get hot. "I did not assume anything. You were in danger. I helped. And I thanked you," she said, her tone perfectly sweet, which made it sting more. "But being grateful does not make me helpless, Mr. Hart." She was right, and that just plain annoyed him. "I meant no offense," he grumbled. "None taken." She smiled then, and it changed her whole face, chasing away the seriousness. "Though I reckon you meant to give a little offense." Caleb felt the corner of his own mouth twitch. "Maybe a little," Ezra laughed, breaking the tension. "Miss Monroe here has been in town 1 week and is already shaking things up. She has got some new ideas about schooling." "Ideas tend to do that," Lydia said. "Mr. Hart, since you are so capable, would you help me carry these books to the school? Call it payment for your rescue." "It was not a rescue," Caleb said. "Assistance then," she replied with that challenging smile. He should have said no. He should have made an excuse and gone back to his solitary life. But he heard himself say, "The school is 2 blocks from here." They walked without talking, him with the heavy box and her with a smaller one. He could feel the whole town watching, probably planning their wedding by sundown. The schoolhouse was simple and clean, with fresh white paint. Inside, it smelled of chalk and new wood. The room was plain, but she had added her own touches, like dried flowers in a vase and student drawings on a board. "How many students do you have?" Caleb asked. 16, from 6 years old to 14. She unpacked the books, her fingers tracing the worn covers like old friends. "Though I expect I will have more once the families figure out I am not planning to corrupt their children with wild ideas." "Are you planning to corrupt them?" Her eyes twinkled. "With teaching them to talk proper like you?" "Yes, guilty as charged. But I doubt that is what worries the parents." "Then what does?" Lydia looked straight at him. "I believe in teaching girls the same things as boys. Math, history, and science, not just sewing. I believe education is a right for everyone, not just for the rich. And I believe children should learn to think for themselves, not just repeat what they are told." "Those are some dangerous ideas," Caleb thought. "You will have a fight on your hands," he said. "I expect so." She did not seem worried at all. But some fights are worth having, Mr. Hart, do not you think? He just wanted to get his supplies and go. Fighting meant caring, and caring was a risk. I should get back to my things, he said, of course. She walked him to the door. Thank you again. He was halfway down the steps when she called out, Mr. Hart, if you ever want to borrow a book, you are welcome to. He paused. Reading was a luxury he had given up long ago. It felt like she saw something in him, something more than just a rough man from the mountains. I do not have much time for reading, he said. The offer stands, she replied, leaning against the door. Sometimes the best books are the ones we make time for. He nodded and left. His hands hurt from the rope, but the strange new feeling in his chest was a whole different kind of ache. At the store, he loaded his horse, ready to ride out and not come back until spring. He would hole up on his homestead and forget all about the school teacher with the storm-gray eyes. Now hold on there, Caleb, Ezra Webb called out, catching him just as he swung up onto his horse. Town's holding a harvest dance next Saturday. You ought to come. Caleb was not interested. No, but Ezra kept on. Miss Monroe is going to be there. Ezra grinned, seeing he had his attention. I saw y'all talking. That is the first time in years I have seen you speak to a woman about more than the weather. We discussed books, Caleb said, his voice flat. Ezra's tone turned serious. Look, son, I know why you keep to yourself, but you are 26 years old, living like a ghost. Your father's path does not have to be yours. Those words cut deep. Without another word, Caleb spurred his horse and rode out of Red Willow. The prairie was wide open and empty, just the way he liked it. But the whole ride home, he could not stop thinking about Lydia Monroe's sharp, gray eyes. For 6 days, Caleb tried to lose himself in his work. He mended fences and chopped wood, trying to fill his head with chores instead of thoughts of the new school teacher. He worked from sunup to sundown, hoping the hard labor would bring him peace. But it did not work. Her face would pop into his mind at the quietest moments. By Saturday, he was worn thin. He had told himself every single day he would not go to that dance. But as the sun began to set, he found himself looking at his own reflection. The man staring back was hard and weathered, his face carved from loneliness. A man who looked older than his years. Was this really the man he wanted to be for the rest of his life? He had built his solitude like a fortress, believing it was the only way to stay safe. To question that now felt like a betrayal. But then he remembered Ezra's words, calling him a man who was already dead. Fine. He would go. He would go just to prove to himself that one woman and one conversation had not gotten under his skin. He would show up, stay for an hour, and then return to his quiet life. He was not going because he hoped to see her again. Not at all. The community hall was full of light and shake. Laughter spilled out into the cold night. Caleb nearly turned right back around, but he forced himself to go inside. The warmth and noise of it all hit him like a wall. Well, I will be, Ezra said, appearing at his side with a wide grin. You actually made it. 1 hour, Caleb grumbled. Then I am gone. Sure you are, Ezra chuckled, handing him a cup of coffee. In case you were wondering, Miss Monroe is over by the punch table. I am not wondering. Of course not. That is why you have been staring over there since you walked in. Caleb scowled, but he could not help but look. Lydia was talking with a group of women. She wore a deep green dress and her hair was tied back loosely. She laughed at something someone said, a clear, happy sound that carried across the room. As if she felt his eyes on her, she looked up and met his gaze. For a moment, the noisy room seemed to disappear. Go on, talk to her. Ezra nudged him. And say what? You could start with hello. It is a good starting place. Before Caleb could argue, the music changed to a waltz. Ezra gave him another push. This is your chance. Do not waste it. I do not dance, Caleb said firmly. The very idea made his chest feel tight. But he knew Ezra was right. Hiding in a corner was pointless. He set down his coffee and walked across the room, feeling like every eye in town was on him. Lydia saw him coming. Mr. Hart, she said, her voice full of surprise. I did not expect to see you here tonight. Seemed like the thing to do, he managed to say. Well, I'm glad you came, she said, her gray eyes studying him, even though you look like you are about to face a firing squad. Social events are not my strong suit. I gathered that, she said with a small smile. So how are you finding Red Willow? Caleb asked, changing the subject. She let him. I am settling in just fine. The children are smart, and your friend Mr. Webb has been a great help. Ezra is helpful, all right. They stood there for a moment while couples danced around them. The music was a soft background to the hum of conversation. What do you believe in, Mr. Hart? She asked suddenly. The question caught him completely by surprise. He believed in being alone. He believed in self-reliance. He believed you could not count on anyone. But he could not say any of that. Survival, he finally answered, just making it through to the next day. That is just existing, she corrected him gently. That is not the same thing as living. Just then the song ended and another began. Before he knew what he was doing, the words were out of his mouth. Would you like to dance? Lydia's eyebrows shot up. I thought you said you do not dance. I do not, but it looks like you do. A smile played on her lips. Fair warning, I will probably step on your toes. I am tougher than I look, he said, and for the first time that night he felt a real smile on his own face. She placed her hand in his. It was warm and felt small in his rough palm. On the dance floor, his heart pounded in his chest. He was clumsy and awkward. Stop thinking so much, Lydia whispered. Just listen to the music. He stumbled, but she held on, guiding him. And after a moment, he began to get the rhythm. Step, step, turn. It was terrifying. And it was, unexpectedly, the best thing he had felt in a very long time. She looked him square in the eye and asked, Mr. Hart, can I ask you something personal? He wanted to say no, but she just kept talking. Why do you work so hard to keep folks at a distance? The question nearly made him trip right there on the dance floor. That's a bit forward, he mumbled. You'll risk your neck for a runaway wagon, but a simple chat seems to cause you real pain, she pointed out. He tried to explain that wagons were simple and people were complicated. She just looked at him with those clear gray eyes. Someone hurt you, she stated, not asking a question at all. He shrugged it off, but she just gave a small nod and let a comfortable quiet settle between them. When the music stopped, she held his hand a moment longer. People can be complicated, she said softly, but they can also be worth the risk. Then she walked away, leaving him feeling like the whole world had tilted. For 6 long years, he had built walls around his heart, and it felt like she had just strolled right past them. He found himself back in town the next Tuesday for no good reason. There he stood outside the schoolhouse at 3:30 in the afternoon, holding an old book and watching her dismiss the last of her students for the day. Before he could lose his nerve, he walked up the steps and knocked. Surprise washed over her face, then it softened into a warm smile. Mr. Hart, what a surprise. He held out the book he was carrying. I heard you have fiction books. I thought maybe we could trade. She welcomed him inside the quiet, sunlit schoolhouse. What kind of stories do you enjoy? She asked. He felt a little foolish. I have not read a story since I was a boy, he admitted. She just smiled and handed him a novel about a man who escapes to the wilderness. When their fingers brushed, he felt a spark. What did you bring for me? She asked. It is poetry, he said quietly. It was my mother's. The words just came out. I was 12 when she left, he heard himself add, and he hated how vulnerable he sounded. He never talked about this. But Lydia's eyes were just gentle. That must have been very difficult, she said. She asked to borrow the book, her voice full of respect for it. Something in the way she asked made his throat tighten up. When she then offered him coffee, he knew he should leave. But the thought of going back to his empty homestead suddenly felt colder than ever. So he nodded and stayed for coffee. He asked if she enjoyed her work out on the frontier. She told him it was much better than the rigid girls' academy she taught at back in Boston. Why would you leave a place like that? He wondered aloud. For the same reason as most folks, I suppose, she answered with a smile. I was looking for something more authentic. She said that life back east was beautiful but suffocating. Out here, life was raw and real, even with all its troubles. He understood exactly what she meant. Fundamentals. You got by. You endured. You met every hardship head-on without any of the comforts of back east. Life out here was raw, but it was honest. Did your folks just let you come out here alone? He asked. Let is a funny word, Lydia said, her voice turning dry. My father wanted me to marry a rich banker, a safe, comfortable and predictable life. When I said no, we had a disagreement. He told me to accept his plan or make my own way with nothing from him. So you picked the Montana territory. I picked freedom, she said, looking him straight in the eye. Even if it comes with trouble, freedom is better than a cozy cage. As the coffee started to brew, Caleb felt himself relax a bit. There was something about Lydia that made talking feel safe. Maybe it was how direct she was. Your turn, she said, grabbing 2 cups. Why this ranch? And why 3 miles from anyone? It is what I know. The land was my father's. Now it is mine. I did not ask what. I asked why Ty. Caleb shifted, looking uncomfortable. Does there have to be a why? A man has to work. Land has to be tended. Most men your age have partners, or at least some hired help, Lydia noted, pouring his coffee. You work all by yourself. I think that is a choice. She saw right through him. Caleb took a sip of the strong, bitter coffee, just how he liked it. He watched the town settle in for the night, a life he had purposefully cut himself off from. My father loved my mother, he finally said, the words feeling rough. When she left, it broke him. He spent the rest of his days mourning a woman who never once looked back. Caleb stared down into his cup. That kind of love looks noble until you see the price. He stopped living long before he died. So you chose not to love anyone? Lydia asked softly. I chose not to need anyone. There is a difference. Is there? She replied, holding her own cup. Seems to me you are paying the same price your father did. You are giving up on life because you are scared of losing it, just taking a different path to the same lonely place. That stung, mainly because it was true. He had never seen his isolation that way, as a slow kind of death. He thought he was being smart, protecting himself from his father's mistake. But maybe she was right. You do not know me, he said, not with anger, but as a simple fact. No, I do not. Not yet, Lydia said thoughtfully. But I know the look of a man who has built his walls so high, he has forgotten what he was trying to protect. And now you are going to tell me to tear them down? Caleb's voice was rough. Miss Monroe, you have not been here a month. You do not know what a real winter is like. The loneliness. That is when pretty ideas about friendship fall apart. You are probably right, she said, not taking offense. I am new. My ideas might not last through January. She paused. But Mr. Hart, you have seen plenty of winters, and each one leaves you more alone. When does just surviving become its own kind of prison? The question just hung in the air. Caleb realized he had been there for over an hour, the longest he had talked to anyone in years. He should have felt drained, but instead, he felt a spark of something he had not felt in a long time. I should be going, he said. Long ride. Of course, Lydia stood and walked with him to the door. Thank you for the book and the talk. I did not mean to talk so much. The best talks are never planned, she said, opening the door to the cold November air. Mr. Hart, Caleb, you are welcome here for more than just books. If you ever want some company, I am usually here after school. It was a simple offer of friendship. No tricks, no expectations. Just kindness offered to a man who had forgotten what it felt like. Caleb was not sure what to do with it. I will keep that in mind, he managed to say. He rode home under the dark sky, the book in his bag feeling heavy. Back in his cabin, he lit the lamps and started a fire. He went about his chores like always. But when he finally sat down, he opened Lydia's book and began to read. A new routine started without him even planning it. Tuesdays and Thursdays, he would find himself at the schoolhouse, trading one book for another. The visits got longer. They talked about books and the struggles of life on the frontier. Little by little, the talks went deeper. Lydia spoke of Boston and her frustration with the life she was supposed to want. Caleb heard himself telling stories of his father, of his own hope slowly fading away. She never pushed for more than he wanted to share. That made it easy. With Lydia, even silence felt comfortable. And when he spoke, she listened like his words were important. You are spending a lot of time in town, Ezra noted one morning when Caleb came by. Would not have anything to do with that new school teacher, would it? Caleb focused on a saw he was checking. We talk about books. Uh-huh. Is that why you have been smiling lately? Books? I do not smile. You did just now when I said her name, Ezra grinned. Look, I am not giving you a hard time. It is good to see you talking to someone. But Caleb, be careful. She is not the kind of woman you can just keep at a distance. She will want more than talk sooner or later. We are just friends. Are you? Ezra got serious. Because it looks to me like you are courting her, showing up all the time, sharing stories. That is how it starts. The question is, do you even realize you are doing it? Caleb had no answer. He just took the tools and left, with Ezra's words echoing in his mind. Was he courting Lydia? The thought was crazy. She knew he did not believe in getting attached. Their friendship was about books and ideas, that was it. But that Thursday, watching her laugh at something he said, seeing the light in her eyes, Caleb felt something inside him change. It was want. Not just because she was a beautiful woman, but a deep need for her company, her thoughts, for the way she made him feel alive instead of just getting by. The feeling scared him to death. Caleb, Lydia touched his arm. You look like you have seen a ghost. I am fine, he said, standing up suddenly. I have to go. It is getting late. It is barely 4 o'clock. Chores, he said, the excuse sounding weak even to him. But he had to leave. He could not stay there with this new feeling burning inside him. I will see you next week. He was gone before she could say another word. Back at his ranch, he worked until his muscles ached, fixing fences in the dim light. He did anything to wear himself out so he could not think. It did not help. That night, Caleb finally admitted what he had been running from. He had real feelings for Lydia Monroe, the kind of feelings that make a man question his whole life, the kind that could break him. He did not go to town the next Tuesday or Thursday. When Ezra came by to check on him, Caleb said he was busy getting ready for winter. That was partly true, but mostly he was hiding from Lydia. He was trying to protect himself from wanting something he believed he could not have. She asked about you, Ezra said, leaning on the barn door. Sounded worried. I am fine. That is what I told her, but Caleb, you cannot just vanish on someone like that. It is not right and she does not deserve it. Caleb stabbed his pitchfork into a pile of hay. What am I supposed to say, Ezra? That I need to stay away from her? I want you to be honest, Ezra said gently, with her and with yourself. If you care for that woman, you tell her. If you do not, you tell her that. But hiding out here in the middle helps nobody. I am not a coward. Then prove it. Go and talk to her. After Ezra left, Caleb stood in the barn thinking. He could keep hiding. Winter storms would give him an excuse. By springtime, she would probably forget all about him. He finally realized he could either keep hiding in the shadows or try to be the man she deserved. Hiding felt an awful lot like being a coward. That Saturday evening, he stood across from her boarding house, feeling like a fool in the cold. Just as he was about to turn and leave, the front door opened. It was Lydia. She looked surprised to see him, and maybe a little hurt. Caleb, she said, can we talk? He asked. After a long moment, she nodded. Let me get this water, then you can come up. Her small room felt cozy and full of life. Caleb's mouth went bone dry. Lydia poured water in a wash bowl, then turned to him. You've been sidestepping me. It was not a question. That was Lydia, straight as an arrow. Yeah, Caleb said, I have. Why? This was it, the time to run or the time to tell the truth. He looked at this woman with her steady gray eyes and a spine made of iron. Because I started wanting things, he said, his voice rough. Things I told myself I couldn't have. What things? You, the word escaped him. Your company, the way you make me feel less alone. Her expression softened just a little. And that spooks you. It ought to spook any man with good sense. Look at me, Lydia. I live like a wild thing out there. My pa loved my ma so much it broke him when she left. I watched it happen. Now you're here, making me forget that lesson. So your answer is to run away. My answer is to be honest. You deserve better than what I can offer. Shouldn't I be the one to decide that? She asked, stepping closer. I am not your mother, Caleb. I will not leave just because things get hard. And you are not your father. You are stronger than you think. Am I? Because right now I feel like I am drowning. Then let me help you. She reached out and took his hand. Her palm was warm and steady. I am not asking for promises you cannot keep. I am just asking you to stop running, just long enough to see what this could be." He looked down at their joined hands. It was a simple thing, but it stood for everything he had avoided for 6 long years. Connection, risk, but maybe, just maybe, something better. "I do not know how to do this," he admitted. "Neither do I," Lydia smiled. "But we could figure it out together, if you are willing to try." He could stay in his safe, lonely world, or he could step into the unknown with this amazing woman. "I am willing," Caleb heard himself say. "I am terrified, but I am willing. That is all I ask." And she pulled him down to sit beside her, and for the first time in forever, he talked. He told her everything. She told him her own story about the courage it took to choose a new life out here. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked. "Not once," she said, leaning against his shoulder. "Because at least I am living, Caleb. Really living." For the first time in years, he felt alive too. The weeks that followed changed his carefully built world. His quiet life now had Lydia in it. They would meet at the schoolhouse and talk for hours. On Saturday nights, they walked down Main Street. The folks in Red Willow surely gossiped, but Caleb found he did not much care. For the first time, he had something worth talking about. Lydia challenged him, pushed him, and refused to let him hide. It was exhausting and wonderful. "You are different," his friend Asia told him one morning. "Lighter." Then he grinned. "So when are you asking her to marry you?" The question hit Caleb hard. Marriage was a promise of forever, everything he feared. But the thought did not bring panic. Instead, it brought a flicker of hope. That night he imagined it, waking up with Lydia, maybe children filling the silence. The idea was equal parts longing and terror. December came with heavy snow, and the cold was biting. The weather turned dangerous, and Caleb was stuck on his homestead. The isolation he once wanted now felt like a prison. He missed her voice, her laugh. He was in deep trouble. When the weather cleared just before Christmas, he rode straight to town. He found Lydia at the schoolhouse. Her whole face lit up. "Caleb, I was starting to worry." He walked right to her, his heart pounding. "I needed to see you," he said, taking a breath. "Lydia, these past months, they have been the best of my life. You make me believe I can be more than what I am." He rushed on. "I am not proposing. Not yet. I am still figuring things out, but I need you to know how much you matter. And if you are willing to be patient with me, I would like to see where this goes." Lydia took both of his hands in hers. "I am not going anywhere." "You say that now," he argued, "but winter is long." "I am not going anywhere," she repeated, her voice firm. "Caleb Hart, you are difficult and guarded, but you are also brave and honest. You are worth the effort. Yes, I will be patient." He pulled her into his arms and just held on. Outside, the snow fell, but inside, Caleb felt warm for the first time in his memory. They spent a quiet Christmas together at her boarding house. With Lydia by his side, he felt like he was a part of something. Something that mattered. January was brutal. Blizzards buried his cabin under drifts as high as the roof. He was trapped for days, and the solitude was no longer a comfort. It felt like exile. He read her books by the fire, finding little notes she had written. It was like having her voice right there with him. When the storms finally broke at the end of the month, Caleb saddled his horse and rode for town. The snow was chest-deep on the animal, and the journey took twice as long. They were both exhausted when they arrived. But the moment he saw Lydia standing in the schoolhouse doorway, her face filled with relief and joy, Caleb knew that every single step had been worth it. "You are a seaman," she said, pulling him out of the blizzard. "Riding in these conditions." He just shook his head. "It has been 3 weeks, Lydia. That was 3 weeks too long." As snow melted onto her floor, she touched his cold face. "I was so worried," she whispered. "I thought you had decided that life alone was simpler." He covered her hand with his own. "Life alone is not simpler," he told her. "It is just emptier. You showed me that." In that quiet schoolhouse, the last of his defenses finally crumbled. "When I met you, I was not really living. I was just surviving. You made me want more for myself." "I love you, Lydia," he finally said, the words feeling heavy and real. "It scares the daylights out of me, but it is the truth." Tears welled in her eyes. "Oh, Caleb," she whispered back, "I have loved you for months. Watching you fight so hard against your own heart, only made me love you more. He kissed her then, a kiss that said everything he could not. When he pulled back, he looked her straight in the eye. Marry me. This spring, without a moment of thought, she said, yes, absolutely yes. They stayed up all night planning a simple life together. A small wedding, living on his homestead, and figuring out the hard parts side by side. The word together finally felt right. When a February thaw made travel easier, Caleb started coming to town every week. Folks stopped seeing him as the hermit from the hills and started treating him like one of their own, knowing he was Lydia's intended. You are getting tame, his friend Ezra joked. Caleb just shrugged, but he knew it was true. Being with Lydia made it all seem possible. They set the wedding date for late April, and Lydia started planning a small gathering with the local women. Caleb's main job was to nod and stay out of the way. Caleb threw himself into expanding the cabin, adding rooms and a real kitchen. He was building their future with his own two hands. You are going to work yourself into the ground, Lydia told him one day when she visited. It does not need to be a palace. It needs to be a proper home for you, he insisted. As she looked around, her mood shifted. My father wrote, she said quietly. He heard about us and asked if I had come to my senses. Caleb saw the hurt in her eyes. I told him I was happy, she said, turning to face him. I told him I am marrying a good man, and he could either accept it or stay out of my life. He will not be at this wedding, she said. I am sorry, Caleb replied. Do not be, she insisted, taking his hands. He made his choice a long time ago. Everything I need is right here. Her strength was something to behold. She had given up everything for this new life and never looked back. I promise I will make you happy, he told her. She smiled. You already do. Just always be straight with me. As they worked together that afternoon, staining floorboards, Caleb realized this was what marriage really was. Not big promises, but quiet work and knowing someone had your back. Just as they were settling into their new life, an old face showed up. It was Marcus Thornton. Hart, he said, getting off his horse. Heard you are getting hitched. Congratulations. Caleb nodded, waiting. I am putting together a cattle drive to Wyoming, Thornton explained. It is big money, and Ezra said you were one of the best. He handed Caleb an envelope. The pay was enough to set them up for years, but the drive left in 3 days and would last 6 weeks. I am getting married in 2 weeks, Caleb stated flatly. I know the timing is bad, Thornton admitted, but I need good men. Caleb saw Thornton was being straight with him. Let me talk to Lydia, he said. It is not just my call anymore. He rode into town with his mind in a knot. The money would give them a real head start, but leaving her right before the wedding felt all wrong. He found her at the schoolhouse and laid out the whole situation. She listened carefully, her face giving nothing away. When he was done, she stared out the window for a long time. That is a whole lot of money, she finally said, and you would be gone for about 6 weeks. Lydia's question cut right through the peaceful afternoon. Do you want to take this job, Caleb? He was taken aback. Their wedding was just 2 weeks away. He told her straight, I am not leaving you for some cattle drive. But Lydia was always the practical one. She saw the money not as a distraction, but as a foundation for their future. She suggested they postpone the wedding. He could go, make their fortune, and come back to start their life on solid ground. It was a bitter pill, but he knew she was speaking the truth. They stayed up late, making a new plan. The wedding would have to wait until June. With a firm handshake, Caleb told Thornton he would join the drive. 3 days later, he was in the saddle, pushing 500 cattle south. The work was hard, but it kept his mind from wandering to Lydia. At first, the trail was easy, and the crew was experienced and capable. Everything was going exactly as planned. That all changed the moment they crossed into Wyoming territory. Cattle began to disappear in the middle of the night, taken by thieves who moved like ghosts. They tracked the rustlers to a canyon, but it was an ambush. Gunfire erupted from the cliffs above. It was chaos, with men shouting and cattle stampeding. Thornton yelled for them to retreat, forcing them to leave 2 of their own behind. This was no longer a cattle drive. It had become a fight for their lives. That night, Thornton was grim. He told the men they were not equipped for a war. The only goal now was to get the rest of the herd to the destination and make it home in one piece. The mood changed completely. Fear replaced the easy confidence they once had. When they were finally paid, it was for less than 300 cattle. The money felt insignificant compared to the cost in lives. Thornton saw the look on Caleb's face that night. "Go home and marry that girl," he said. "Life is too short to wait." Caleb took that advice to heart. But 3 days into their journey home, the rustlers found them again. There was no warning, just the sudden crack of rifles from the rocks above them. It was another brutal, bloody ambush. All hell broke loose in a storm of dust and whinnying horses. Before Caleb even knew what was happening, a hot, searing pain punched through his ribs. He'd been shot. As the world started to spin and fade to gray, his friend Thornton was there, yelling something about the nearest doctor being 2 whole days away. But the only word that cut through the fog was her name. Lydia. He had made a promise that he was coming home to her. The following days melted into a long nightmare of rough travel and a raging fever. Caleb knew he was dying. Sometimes he thought he could hear Lydia's voice on the wind, a cruel trick of his breaking mind. The worst part was the bitter irony of it all. He had spent 6 long years dodging love just so no one would ever have to grieve for him, only to end up leaving Lydia with the very same heartbreak he had tried so hard to avoid. "I'm so sorry," was all he could whisper into the darkness. When his eyes finally opened and focused, he was not on the trail but in a simple cabin, and Lydia was sitting right there beside him. She had come all the way from Montana the moment the doctor sent word. "Do not you dare die on me, Caleb Hart," she demanded through her tears. But the fever was a powerful thing, and it pulled him back under, tossing him into terrible dreams where his deepest fears came to life. Nightmares that whispered love would only ever lead to ruin. "You're wrong," she whispered, her hand a cool comfort on his blazing forehead. "Love is not what breaks a man, Caleb. Fear is." He was lost in a fever dream, a place between this world and the next. For days, his body had been a war zone. Then the fever shattered like glass. Caleb woke up to a quiet he had not known for days. A deep ache had settled in his bones, but the fire was gone. He was weak, so weak that even turning his head felt like a chore. "Easy now," Lydia said, appearing at his side in an instant. Her eyes were shadowed with worry. "You have been asleep for a long time." "How long?" he rasped. She brought a cup of cool water to his lips. 8 days. The doctor did not think you would pull through." Fragments of memory returned. The ambush. Thornton yelling his name. He looked down and saw his chest was wrapped in clean bandages. "The bullet broke 2 of your ribs and clipped a lung," Lydia explained softly. "The infection nearly finished the job. Dr. Morrison says you are a lucky man." Caleb did not feel lucky, but he was alive. And being alive meant he had a chance to set things right. "Lydia, I am so sorry," he began. "No," she said, her voice firm. "This was not your fault. You were doing good, honest work." "But I left you," he insisted. "I chose this money over you." "We chose that together," she corrected him, taking his hand. "I was the one who encouraged you to go. I thought we were being practical. I nearly got you killed with my practical thinking. When I heard you were hurt, I rode for 3 days straight. When I saw you lying there burning with fever, I thought I had sent you to your grave." She took a shaky breath. "I spent 4 nights listening to you rave, telling the shadows that love only destroys things." A wave of shame washed over him. Even at death's door, he was still trying to push her away. "I did not mean any of that," he said. "I know," she replied, wiping a tear from her cheek. "But it showed me your deepest fear. Caleb, if we are going to have a life together, you have to trust me. I am not going anywhere just because things get hard. I am here. I chose you." He looked at the woman who had refused to give up on him, and all his arguments seemed foolish. "You are right," he said. "I love you. It scares me half to death, but I love you. I know," she said, kissing his forehead. Day by day, his strength slowly returned. Dr. Morrison checked his wounds, pleased with what he saw. "You are healing up faster than I expected," the doctor told him. "With some time, you will make a full recovery." Thornton came to visit that afternoon, his face heavy with guilt. "This is all my fault," he said. "Nonsense," Caleb replied. "Rustlers are the ones to blame, not you." Thornton handed him a thick envelope. "This is your share, plus a bonus from mine. It is the least I can do." Caleb opened it and saw more money than he had ever dreamed of. The very thing he had nearly died for now felt strangely empty. "Thank you," Caleb said. "For everything." Thornton nodded. "Get well, Hart, and marry that woman." Living a good life is the best revenge. After he left, Lydia sat on the bed. Was it worth it? She asked quietly. Caleb looked right into her eyes. No, nothing is worth what we just went through. I was wrong to go. You cannot undo the past, Caleb, she said, taking his hand. We can only learn and do better. Then I am learning that you are what matters, he said. More than money, more than pride, and more than the fear I have let run my life for so long. In the quiet days that followed, they truly talked. Caleb finally understood his father's tragedy. It was not love that destroyed him, but a desperate dependence. Your father made your mother his whole world, Lydia explained one day. When she was gone, he had nothing left. That is not love. We are different. We have our own lives, but we are choosing to build one together. Her words were like a key turning in a lock he had not known was there. He had always confused love with losing himself. Now he saw that real love, healthy love, was possible. When we get married, Caleb said, I want to do it right. I want to stand up and promise you forever, without any fear holding me back. That is what we will do, she said, smiling. But you should know I am not always easy. I have opinions, and I will challenge you. Good, he said. I need someone who will not let me hide. They left 2 weeks later, traveling slowly in a wagon Thornton had prepared. As they headed north toward home, Caleb held Lydia's hand, ready to start the life he had almost lost. Ready? She asked. More than ready, he answered. The 5-day journey back to Red Willow was slow going, but Caleb was just plain grateful to be alive. He knew he was a changed man, understanding now that healing was not some place you arrive at, but a long road you walk. His old friend Ezra was waiting at the edge of town, his weathered face breaking into a wide grin of relief. Word of his close call had spread like a prairie fire, and it seemed the whole town could finally breathe easier knowing he was home. Lydia set their wedding for June 15th, giving him 3 weeks to get his strength back proper. As they rode out to his homestead, Caleb knew this was the place where they would build their future together. It is beautiful, she said, her eyes taking in the cabin he had built bigger just for her. He pulled her close and said, I spent 6 years putting this place together all by myself, thinking that was enough. You showed me just how wrong I was. I do not want to build anything alone ever again. Good, she told him, because I am not leaving. They spent that whole afternoon just planning their life together. Every small decision felt like a promise of forever. Caleb had never let himself want this kind of partnership, and now he could not imagine a day without it. The weeks before the wedding flew by as they settled into a natural rhythm. One afternoon, while fixing a fence, Ezra told him, You seem different, Caleb, settled, like you stopped fighting with yourself. Caleb looked toward the cabin where he could see Lydia. Maybe I have, he said. He had spent so long believing that a locked-up heart was a safe one. I almost had to lose it all to see I had everything backwards. My father let love destroy him. I am choosing to let it build me up. Ezra put a hand on his shoulder. Your mother would be proud of the man you are. Caleb had not thought about his mother in years, but maybe Ezra was right. On June 15th, their wedding day was clear and beautiful. Caleb waited at the church, watching Lydia walk toward him on Ezra's arm. In that moment, all his fear washed away. This woman had seen him broken and had never once turned her back. You look beautiful, he whispered. She smiled and whispered back, You look alive. I like that better. As the Reverend spoke, Caleb finally understood the words. Marriage was about choosing your partner every single day. When asked, his I do came without a sliver of doubt, and hers rang out just as strong. They exchanged rings, and he kissed his new wife with a heart full of gratitude. The whole town celebrated with them. After 2 hours of festivities, his body reminded him he was still mending. Lydia saw it right away. Ready to go home? She asked. Home. The word felt right. He nodded, and they rode out toward the sunset. When they reached the homestead, he helped Lydia down and carried her right through the doorway. You should be resting, she laughed. This was necessary, he said, setting her down. I wanted one tradition. She kissed him deeply. I love you, Caleb Hart. He held her close. Thank you for not giving up on me. She took his hand. That is what marriage is. We fight for each other. That night, they talked until sunrise, not about big dreams, but about the small things that make a life. As the sun came up, Caleb watched her sleep and felt a deep peace. His father had always said it was safer to be alone, but he had been wrong. Real safety was having someone by your side to face the risks with. For years, Caleb built walls, thinking love was a weakness. Now he knew the truth. His father's mistake was not loving, but loving without a firm footing of his own. He and Lydia were different. They were two whole people choosing to build one life. There would be hard times, sure, but those struggles would only make them stronger. Inside their cabin, he felt a solid hope. It was a hope they had earned. His parents had both been lost to their own kinds of love, but Lydia had shown him a better way. They would build their life on respect and shared strength. Knowing they would face every hardship together made all the difference. He pulled her closer as the morning sun filled the room. This new life was everything he had been too scared to even want. He had been wrong about so much, but with Lydia, he had finally gotten something right. Summer came on strong, and the land itself seemed to soften. The cabin, once his fort against the world, was now truly a home. Lydia's touch was everywhere, from the garden she planted to the coffee she made before dawn. The quiet he once welcomed now felt empty when she was gone. He found himself always keeping an eye on her as he worked. "You are hovering," she told him one morning in the garden, her voice kind. "I am not going to vanish." He knew she was right, but the old fear of loss died hard. Still, with every sunrise they shared, that fear loosened its hold on him, bit by bit. By July, Caleb felt stronger than he had in years, as if cheating death had somehow forged him anew. When Lydia brought up the idea of a dinner party, the old Caleb would have turned tail and run. But now he found himself agreeing. They even invited Marcus Thornton and his wife Sarah. On the night of the party, their little cabin was buzzing with warm voices and easy laughter. With Lydia right there beside him, Caleb discovered that he did not mind the company one bit. In fact, it felt good. Sarah Thornton, who had known him during his most solitary days, told him how genuinely happy he looked. "I am happy," Caleb said, and he meant it with his whole heart. Later that evening, Thornton pulled him aside to tell him the marshals had tracked down and caught the rustlers from the ambush. He then offered Caleb a spot on another cattle drive, but he already knew the answer. Caleb just smiled, looking through the window at his wife. "You guessed right," he said. His trail driving days were over for good. Caleb survived, and he made it home to Lydia. They got married and started building their life just as they had planned. But the lessons of the trail were not over. The true test of their partnership came not from rustlers, but from a simple misunderstanding. Caleb bought breeding stock from a neighbor, believing it was a smart move for the ranch. He never thought to discuss it with Lydia first. He thought he was doing his part as the man of the house. But Lydia's voice was firm. "We are partners, Caleb," she said. "This is our ranch, and we make big decisions together." In that moment, he understood. The long, dangerous cattle drive had taught him how to survive. But it was Lydia who was teaching him how to build a real marriage, one based on trust and true partnership. "This year taught us we need savings for when things go wrong," she said, finally turning from the window. Caleb knew she was right, and it stung because he was already making the decision in his head, falling back into his old ways. "You are right," he said quietly. "I should have come to you as my partner, not just to tell you my thoughts." Her eyes flashed with anger. "Yes, you should have. I am not just along for the ride, Caleb. My opinion matters." He struggled for the words. "It is just, I am so used to deciding things on my own." "Well, get unused to it," she said, her voice softening a little. "I will not be ignored." They talked it through, honestly and not without some difficulty. They decided against the cattle drive. In that conversation, they set a rule. Big decisions, they make together. It was a new way of living for Caleb, but he knew her insight made him stronger, not weaker. "We are both stubborn," Lydia said later, after they had learned to work through their disagreements. "We cannot let fights build walls between us." "Agreed." Caleb pulled her close. "I am a slow learner, but I am learning. That is all I ask." That October, the snow came early and hard, trapping them inside for a week. But it was not a prison. It was a gift. They read together, cooked good food, and just enjoyed being close. "This is what I dreamed of," Lydia said one night, watching the snow fall. "Simple and perfect moments like this." "Perfect?" Caleb looked around their small cabin. "You could have had a much easier life back in Boston. But not this," she said, pointing to the space between them. "Not a true partnership. Money cannot buy what we have, Caleb. And he knew she was right. Their life was hard, but it was real. It was something they had built together, side by side. After the big storm, Caleb learned his wife had a tough streak. That proper school teacher from Boston was more capable than anyone had figured. She could mend a fence or calm a nervous horse with the best of them. "You are just full of surprises," Caleb admitted while watching her work. Lydia just smiled. "When folks think you are helpless, you learn how to get things done without a fuss." Then November brought the greatest news of all. Lydia was pregnant. A child was on the way. "I'm going to be a father," Caleb said, feeling both thrilled and terrified. Caleb grew more protective, though Lydia insisted on doing her part. Evenings were for him carving a cradle and her knitting baby clothes. They often talked about their future family. "I just want our child to know it is okay to love someone," Caleb confessed one night. Lydia took his hand. "Our child will see how we are together. Your father's story does not have to be theirs. We will make mistakes, but we will own up to them and do better. That is how you break a bad cycle." She knew his heart and chose his gifts with care, even sewing him a warm new coat herself. These weren't fancy things, but they were everything. Lydia placed a hand on her rounded belly and smiled. "Next Christmas, there will be 3 of us." That simple truth hit Caleb like a warm sunrise. A year ago, he'd figured being alone was the only way to be safe. Now his wife was carrying their child, and he was looking forward to a future he never even knew he wanted. The winter in Montana got deep, but their little cabin stayed warm, a safe haven from the world. This wasn't exile anymore. It was a retreat, a time to build a life together. Lydia was strong through her pregnancy, and Caleb felt a quiet relief when she finally stopped making that long trip to the schoolhouse. She told him, "I'm not made of glass, you know." He just smiled and said, "I know, but just let me worry a little, all right?" They found their rhythm on the ranch. She handled the lighter chores, and he took on the heavy lifting. It was a partnership, a constant dance of give and take. Spring started to thaw the land, and Caleb felt that old itch to get to work. But he had a family to think about now. He couldn't afford to be reckless. His friend Ezra came by and noticed the change right away. "The old you would have worked himself into the ground by now," he said. Caleb just looked toward the cabin. "I reckon I've got good reasons to be careful these days." April brought new lambs and one close call. A ewe was in trouble, and Caleb worked for hours, bone-tired, to save her and her baby. When it was over, Lydia cleaned him up. "You did a good thing," she said gently. "You saved them both." He started to second-guess himself, but she stopped him. "Don't you dare. You're allowed to feel good when things go right." May came in a burst of green and wildflowers. Lydia was beautifully pregnant, and Caleb found himself talking to her belly, telling their unborn child all about the ranch and the big Montana sky. Lydia caught him one afternoon, and her eyes shone. "You're going to be a wonderful father," she told him. "You really think so?" he asked, a knot of old fear in his throat. "I know so," she said with a certainty that calmed his soul. He hoped with all his might that she was right. He was learning to face his fears instead of letting them run his life. June arrived, and the air was thick with anticipation. The baby was due any day. Caleb paced the cabin floor until Lydia finally laughed. "You're going to wear a hole in the floorboards." He stopped and took her hand. I can't lose you, either of you." She squeezed his hand tight. "You won't. We're a team, remember? We're going to be just fine." Labor started on a hot July afternoon. One minute Lydia was in the garden, the next, everything was happening all at once. Caleb rode like the wind to fetch the doctor and his wife. By the time he got back, Lydia was deep in her labor, her face tight with effort, but her voice steady as a rock. "Took you long enough," she managed to say. "Never," he said, taking her hand. "I'm right here." Those next few hours were the longest of his life. He'd faced down danger before, but watching the woman he loved in so much pain, unable to do anything but hold on, was a whole new kind of test. She was the strongest person he'd ever known, fighting with every breath to bring their child into the world. Then a cry cut through the quiet room, loud and clear. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, holding up a tiny, perfect baby. A daughter. Caleb couldn't believe it. She had dark hair like her mama and the tiniest fingers he'd ever seen. When they laid her in Lydia's arms, the whole world seemed to stop. "She's perfect," Lydia whispered. Caleb touched his daughter's hand, and her little fingers wrapped right around his. They named her Grace. It was the perfect name for a gift they never knew how much they needed. The first weeks were a blur of exhaustion and pure joy. Caleb discovered a deep well of patience he never knew he had. He could just sit and watch her sleep for hours. "You are completely smitten, Zeppa," Lydia teased him one day. "How did we make something so perfect?" he wondered aloud. "Teamwork," she said, leaning against him as they both watched their daughter. It was true. They were a team, through thick and thin. For his first birthday as a father, Lydia gave him a letter. It was from her father. "He wants to visit," she said. "He wants to meet his granddaughter." The letter was warmer this time, a real olive branch. "It's your home too, Caleb," she told him. "We decide this together." So they invited him to come in September. James Monroe was a bit stiff and out of place on the frontier, but the moment he held little Grace, you could see the ice around his heart start to melt. "She has your mother's eyes," he told Lydia, his voice soft. The visit wasn't a fairy tale cure, but it was a start. It was a bridge being built, and sometimes that's more than enough. Fall settled in and Caleb found his new routine as a father. He'd carry Grace in a sling while he did his chores, talking to her about the land and the animals. He was telling her about cattle breeding one afternoon when Lydia laughed. "You're going to confuse that poor child." Caleb just grinned. "It's never too early to learn. Besides, she likes the sound of my voice." And she did. The bond between them grew stronger every single day. He was learning how to love without fear, how to be devoted without losing himself. Winter came around again. The cabin was a little more crowded with 3 people, but it was a good kind of crowded, full of life. On Christmas Eve, the 3 of them sat by the fire. Caleb, Lydia, and their daughter Grace, who was now 5 months old, in the center of their entire world. Snow was falling outside, but their cabin was warm and perfect. "Remember last Christmas?" Lydia asked. "When you said there would be 3 of us, I thought it was impossible, that I did not deserve this," Caleb said, looking at his wife and their daughter Grace. "Now I see it is not about what you deserve. It is about what you choose. We chose this life." Grace slept peacefully between them, completely safe. His father was wrong. Fear was the real weakness, not love. And Caleb was done with being afraid. Outside, the vast Montana land remained as beautiful and brutal as ever. But Caleb was a different man. He now knew that just surviving was a lonely way to live. He had built a fortress around his heart and ended up a prisoner. Lydia had shown him the way out, but he had to take that first step himself. Home was not the cabin or the land. It was this feeling of belonging he had with his family. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you too," she said, her eyes still closed. "My entire world is right here." Little Grace would keep on growing, and their family might just get bigger. The ranch would see good years and bad, depending on the weather and the market, things a man just cannot control. But they would face it all side by side. Caleb used to think being alone made a man strong. He was wrong about that. Real strength is finding someone worth letting in. It is choosing love when fear seems a whole lot safer. His daddy's story ended sad because he put all his happiness in one person. Caleb's story was different. It was built solid, with 2 whole people making a life together. As the clock ticked toward Christmas, he knew he had all he needed right there. Caleb stayed up, just watching his family, thankful for the life he nearly let slip by. That Montana wind could sure howl outside, but in that room there was only peace, a father, a mother, and a daughter. He had stopped riding toward lonesome country. Now he always rode for home, for Lydia's smile and Grace's laugh. He was not alone against the harsh frontier anymore, and that made all the difference. This was the legacy that mattered. Not building walls, but opening doors. This was not just surviving, it was truly living, and it was more than enough.